The courtroom was full of nervous energy. It was just after 9 a.m. and the seats were already crowded. Reporters were whispering to each other. People who helped with the law were running down the aisles. The audience was all staring at the doors, waiting for something big to happen. They all knew something important was coming, but maybe not the judge, Judge Richard Hawk. He stormed into the room like he was angry, wearing his black robes. His lips were twisted in a permanent frown. The clerk barely had time to stand up when he yelled, "No coffee in my courtroom." The young woman quickly said, "Sorry, Your Honor." But the judge didn't want to hear it. He snapped, "Save it. If the defense isn't here in 2 minutes, I'll charge them with contempt." He sat down hard at his bench, glaring at everyone. Even the lawyers on the prosecution team were sitting stiffly, looking nervous. They all knew how tough Judge Hawk could be. He was famous for being strict and, lately, for being very mean to anyone who believed in religion or had conservative ideas. The case seemed simple. Albert Derrick, who started the Faith and Family Foundation, was accused of not paying his taxes. The government said the foundation wasn't real. The defense said the foundation had helped people for years. But no one cared about the case anymore. They were all talking about the man who was supposed to speak in the trial. The man everyone was waiting for came in quietly. No big security team, no reporters following him around. He just wore a simple gray jacket over a white shirt and jeans. His hair was tied back and he carried an old leather bag. But the thing everyone noticed was the silver cross around his neck. A woman in the audience gasped. A man leaned forward, staring at him. The man walked quietly with no rush. His face was calm and he nodded politely at the people in the courtroom. He even gave a respectful look to the court staff. Judge Hawk's face twisted with anger when he saw the cross. The clerk whispered, "Your Honor, the defense's witness is here." But the judge didn't care. He just smiled in a mean way and said, "Oh, isn't that special? Hollywood has finally come to church." Some people in the room chuckled, but no one laughed loudly. The judge leaned into the microphone and said, "Make sure he knows this isn't a movie set. In my courtroom, his celebrity status doesn't matter." Keanu sat quietly behind the defense table. His fingers lightly touched the cross on his neck. He didn't say a word, but the fight had already started. Before we keep going, do you believe in God? If you do, type 1 in the comments below. Let's see how many people still believe in faith even when the world tries to stop it. As Keanu sat down, everyone in the room went quiet. He didn't act like a famous person at all. There were no sunglasses, no big crowd following him, no drama. He just walked in like anyone else. He wasn't wearing anything special, just a white shirt tucked into dark jeans and a gray jacket. But the silver cross around his neck caught everyone's attention. Most people saw it as just a necklace, but to some people in the room, including Judge Hawk, it was much more than that. The judge stared at the cross like it was something he hated. Everyone in the room stood up when the bailiff said, "All rise." But the judge didn't even look at them. He just kept staring at Keanu and his necklace. "Be seated," the judge said without even glancing at anyone else. His fingers tapped on the bench, making a quiet noise. "Let the record show," he said, "the defense has brought in a guest star." Some people in the room laughed uncomfortably, but no one laughed hard. The judge smiled to himself, thinking he had said something funny. Keanu didn't react. He sat straight, with his hands folded on the table. The cross on his neck didn't move. It stayed steady. The lawyer for the defense whispered something to Keanu, and Keanu nodded quietly. Judge Hawk leaned back in his chair, looking down at Keanu with cold eyes. "Mr. Reeves," he said loudly, "I hope you know this is a courtroom, not a movie set. If you're here to talk about faith or values or whatever you say on TV, save it." Some people in the audience whispered, and even the lawyers on the prosecution side shifted uncomfortably. Keanu looked up at the judge and said calmly, "I'm here to tell the truth, Your Honor. Nothing more." Judge Hawk's face tightened and he said, "We'll see. Just remember, your charm and that little necklace of yours won't mean anything here. This isn't a movie where the good guy always wins in the end." For a moment, the room was quiet. Keanu nodded slowly. "Understood, sir," he said. But the judge couldn't stop glaring at the cross, like it was a challenge to him. The trial continued, and it became clear that this wasn't just about taxes anymore. This was about power, about beliefs, and for Judge Hawk it had turned personal. When Keanu got up to testify, the first thing Judge Hawk noticed wasn't Keanu's fame or the briefcase he carried. It was the cross. The silver cross. It gleamed in the light, reminding the judge of everything he hated about people like Derrick, and now it seemed he hated it about Keanu too. Judge Hawk leaned forward in his chair, his voice sharp and filled with anger. "Stop," he ordered, and the entire courtroom froze. Keanu, who had been walking calmly toward the witness stand, paused with one foot on the step. His face remained calm, unmoving, even though the tension in the room was growing by the second. "That thing on your chest," Judge Hawk said, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto the silver cross Keanu was wearing. "Take it off." There was no mistaking what the judge meant. His voice was low but carried the weight of a command. The room became eerily quiet. Everyone was waiting, watching to see what Keanu would do next. Keanu glanced down at the silver cross that hung around his neck for a brief moment, then looked back up at the judge. His face was calm, composed, almost serene. "It's a symbol of my faith, Your Honor," Keanu said quietly, his voice steady and respectful. Judge Hawk's lips twisted into a sneer. "This is a courtroom, not a church," he snapped. "I won't allow any religious symbols in here. Take it off." His words hung in the air, heavy and firm. There was a sudden flicker of discomfort in the room. Some people gasped. Others shifted in their seats. Even the lawyers on both sides seemed uneasy, but Judge Hawk wasn't done. He continued with a harsh tone. "Are you trying to win sympathy, Mr. Reeves?" he asked, his voice full of suspicion. "Are you playing the role of the humble believer to make the jury feel sorry for you and get a good headline?" The room was silent. No one laughed. Keanu didn't flinch or respond in anger. He simply stood there, calm and unshaken, his expression never changing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make any big gestures. Instead, he walked into the witness box, sat down, and folded his hands in front of him. "I'm not here to perform," Keanu said quietly, his voice still calm and even. But Judge Hawk wasn't finished with his accusations. His voice rose again, this time even louder and more aggressive. "You actors think that wearing a little silver necklace makes you righteous," he said, his words like daggers. "You hide behind your God and your faith, thinking it gives you some kind of excuse to lie for criminals. Take it off. Now." Keanu's eyes remained locked on the judge, calm and steady. The cross stayed where it was, still hanging around his neck. Judge Hawk's face turned bright red with anger. Behind his fury, however, there was something else, something deeper. It was as though the simple symbol on Keanu's chest was making the judge uncomfortable, reminding him of something he couldn't control. Faith, truth, conviction. Things that no amount of power could erase, no matter how hard the judge tried. Keanu didn't back down. He sat still, unshaken, not with defiance, but with a quiet strength that spoke volumes. He looked at Judge Hawk, not with hate or anger, but with something much stronger, clarity. "If my presence offends the court," Keanu said slowly, "then it's not me you're afraid of. It's what I represent." For a moment, the room was completely still. It felt like the air had thickened and everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Then Judge Hawk's gavel slammed down with a sharp bang like thunder. "One more word and I'll hold you in contempt," he shouted. But Keanu had already said what needed to be said. He had spoken the truth without raising his voice or pointing fingers. He had only refused to back down, and for Judge Hawk that was unforgivable. Keanu placed his briefcase gently on the wooden table in front of him. He did so with the quiet certainty of someone who knew a storm was coming, but wasn't afraid of the rain. The silver cross still hung around his neck, untouched and undisturbed, a quiet act of defiance that Judge Hawk refused to let go. The judge continued to glare at Keanu, his face twisted in anger. But Keanu didn't look away. Instead, he calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out the first of several files he had brought with him. "With the court's permission," Keanu said, his voice still calm, "I'd like to present financial documentation related to Mr. Derek's charitable foundation. Specifically, contributions made and verified over the last 7 years." He slid the first file across the table to the defense attorney, who passed it on to the judge. But Judge Hawk didn't even look at the documents. "Denied," the judge barked. "Irrelevant." The courtroom stirred in surprise. The defense attorney blinked in disbelief. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling, "these documents are very relevant. They show the good that Mr. Derek's foundation has done over the years." "I said they're irrelevant," Judge Hawk repeated, louder this time. "I don't need a history lesson on charity work. This case is about tax evasion, not a feel-good story." The gavel slammed down again, but Keanu didn't react. He reached calmly into his briefcase once more. "Then perhaps we can move on to more specific transactions," he said, pulling out a second file. "This file concerns a series of offshore wire transfers made from an organization called the Liberty Foundation." Judge Hawk stood up suddenly, his voice rising. "Mr. Reeves," he snapped, "if you are insinuating some kind of conspiracy theory, I warn you, This court will not entertain your little Hollywood screenplay. Keanu's eyes met the judge's directly, calm and unwavering. I'm not insinuating anything, he said slowly, his voice measured. I'm presenting documented facts. He slid the second file forward, the tab marked with a date and a name. Judge Hawk's eyes flicked toward the label. March 15th, Liberty Foundation. For just a moment, the judge froze. Then he exploded. This is a setup, he shouted, slamming his hands down on the bench. I will not allow some washed-up actor to ruin my name with unverified garbage. The people in the courtroom gasped in shock. The court reporter stopped typing. Even the prosecution team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Keanu didn't flinch. He remained composed. These aren't smears, he said slowly. They're bank records, transfer logs, authorization forms, all legal, all admissible, all traced directly. Enough. Judge Hawk roared, his voice cracking. This isn't about me. But it was. Everyone in the courtroom could see it now. The fear behind the judge's fury, the panic in his voice, the desperation in his eyes as he looked not at Keanu or the jury, but at something on his desk. A folder. Thin, stamped, misplaced. Keanu's eyes followed the folder as well. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. The room had shifted. The judge no longer looked like a man in control. He looked like a man trying to appear in control, gripping the edge of his bench as if it might collapse beneath him. Keanu calmly reached into his briefcase again and pulled out another file. This one, Keanu said, his voice as calm as ever, concerns the Thompson case, a small business owner in Indiana. Judge Hawk stiffened. Keanu continued, the man was accused of misappropriating relief funds. His defense team requested to present evidence, bank records, customer affidavits, and letters from charitable recipients. You denied all of them. Hawk shook his head. That case has no bearing on this one, he said, his voice trembling. Keanu didn't raise his voice. The man lost his shop, his home, everything, he said softly but with conviction. And later, after an investigation, it was found that the funds were properly accounted for. But the damage had already been done. He lost everything. Keanu's voice cut through the room, sharper than any shout. You sealed the records just hours after a private meeting with representatives from the Liberty Foundation. Judge Hawk slammed his gavel again, but this time there was a nervousness in his movements. You don't get to question my motives, he spat. I'm not questioning them, Keanu replied, his voice even. I'm revealing them. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even the prosecution team looked shaken. Keanu didn't stop. He laid out another file. Then there was Mrs. Anderson, he said, his voice still calm. A 72-year-old widow accused of wire fraud. She couldn't afford proper legal representation, so her church offered to assist with her case. They brought in financial records to support her defense. You dismissed their testimony before they could even speak. Judge Hawk's face was turning red again. Veins were visible in his temples as he pointed a shaking finger at Keanu. You are crossing a line, Mr. Reeves? No, Keanu said quietly. You crossed it years ago. A heavy silence filled the room. It wasn't an empty silence. It was filled with weight, with eyes turning toward the judge, with the sense that something huge was happening. Keanu had said enough. He placed the remaining files down one by one, creating a stack in front of him. Each file was labeled with a name, a case number, and a date that matched too closely with untraceable deposits, sealed meetings, and missing records. The audience shifted uneasily. Even the prosecution team looked disturbed. Judge Hawk's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. You think you can come in here and lecture me about justice? You think wearing a cross makes you holy? Keanu looked at him steadily, his expression calm. No, he said simply. It reminds me to stand when others are crushed. And right now, Your Honor, too many have been crushed under your gavel. Judge Hawk reached for his gavel again, but his hand was trembling. He didn't strike it this time. The courtroom was utterly silent. No one moved. No one whispered. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone knows that something big is about to break. And Keanu broke it with a quiet whisper. Perhaps we should move to March 15th. Judge Hawk flinched. Keanu reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. It didn't look very important at first glance, but the bold, sharp lettering on the front clearly marked it, Liberty Foundation, Internal Records. He placed the folder on the table gently like it was something fragile, but he knew that this piece of paper held the truth, and it was the moment that would change everything. This folder contains evidence, Keanu said calmly, looking directly at the judge across the room. It details a series of off-the-record meetings between you, Judge Hawk, and executives from the Liberty Foundation. These meetings happened in the 24 hours just before you made decisions in court against people who were linked to religious charities. The judge's face immediately turned pale. He looked as though he had seen a ghost, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "That's not admissible," he croaked. Keanu didn't flinch. "No objections were raised when the evidence was submitted," he replied smoothly. "You accepted these documents when they were handed to you during discovery. Your signature is even on the receipt." The judge blinked rapidly, trying to regain control of the situation. He quickly reached out and grabbed another folder from his desk, not the one Keanu had just placed in front of him, but one he thought he had hidden away safely. His thumb nervously flicked through the pages, but Keanu could see the panic in his eyes. "You planted this," the judge spat, his voice shaking with fury. "You set me up." Keanu shook his head slowly, still calm, still composed. "You set yourself up, Your Honor. I simply gave you the space to show everyone the truth." With that, the judge slammed his hand down hard on the desk, causing the glass of water to rattle. "I am the law in this courtroom," he shouted. "I don't answer to actors or celebrities who think they've been sent by God to save the world." The insult hung in the air, but no one in the room laughed. There was complete silence. Even the court clerk stopped typing, her fingers frozen in midair above the keyboard as though she didn't dare write another word. Keanu's voice was soft, but the words cut through the silence. "What exactly are you trying to protect, Judge?" he asked. "It's not justice. And it's certainly not the truth." The judge's face twisted, his composure beginning to break down. His hands shook as he pointed a finger at Keanu. "You think you're better than me just because you wear a cross and believe in some sky wizard?" he spat. "You think you can use God to shame me?" Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to, because at that moment someone else finally spoke. The court clerk stood up, her eyes full of tears. "He made me do it," she whispered. "He made me shred the missing files. He threatened my career if I didn't follow his orders." Judge Hawk turned on her like a cornered animal. "Liar," he yelled. "You're part of this conspiracy. You're part of the conservative plot to take me down." Keanu didn't react. Instead, he pushed the folder forward, making it clear to everyone in the room what was really happening. On top of the pile of papers was a scanned signature. It was Judge Hawk's signature, directly linked to an offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands, which was connected to the Liberty Foundation. That account linked him to everything. The judge slammed his fist down on the desk, but the gavel had already lost its power. It wasn't the judge who was in control anymore. The folder sat between them like a loaded gun, and Keanu didn't need to touch it. The evidence was clear for everyone to see. The signature was there in black ink on a transfer form linking the judge to shady deals. Judge Hawk stepped back from the bench, his hands trembling. He pointed again at Keanu, but this time his voice was filled with desperation. "Get him out of here," he yelled. "I want that man in cuffs now." But the officer standing nearby didn't move. The bailiff looked over at the clerk and the clerk looked away. Keanu, however, remained unfazed. He took another document out of his briefcase and calmly placed it on the table. "Before you arrest anyone, Your Honor, I think we should discuss Emily Harper's discrimination case," Keanu said. "You dismissed it less than 24 hours after meeting with Victor Harrison, the CEO of Allied Securities, and a major donor to the Liberty Foundation." The color drained from the judge's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was speechless, too afraid to admit what had happened. "You can't," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "That meeting was private." Keanu didn't even flinch. "So were the payments," he replied, his voice steady and firm. Then the back door to the courtroom opened, not with a loud crash but with a firm, deliberate swing. Half a dozen people dressed in dark suits walked in, led by a tall man with a badge clipped to his belt. They were federal agents, real ones, not the kind you see in movies. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. The court clerk dropped her pen, her hands shaking. The lead agent stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This courtroom is now under federal investigation," the agent said. "Judge Richard Hawk, please remain where you are." Judge Hawk, no longer in control, backed away from the bench. "You can't do this," he shouted. "This is my court. I have immunity." The agent raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Not from federal corruption charges," he said coolly. The judge's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, for someone to help him, for any way out of this situation. But there was nowhere to go. He was trapped. "This is all a setup," he screamed, his voice filled with panic. A conservative ambush. You planned this? You and your God-loving friends. Keanu, still calm and steady, simply replied, "No, Your Honor. You planned this. Every unjust ruling, every sealed record, every backdoor deal. We just gave you the rope to hang yourself." The judge let out a strangled cry, a mix of rage and disbelief. He lunged toward the damning folder one last time, arms outstretched, but the lead agent intercepted him mid-step, grabbing his wrist firmly. "You crossed the line years ago," the agent said. The sound of handcuffs clicking filled the room, loud as thunder. The gallery, which had been full of gasps and murmurs, was now silent. Judge Hawk, his face red with anger and fear, was led out of the courtroom in shackles. His once powerful eyes, full of judgment, were now wide with fear. "You think this changes anything?" the judge spat, his voice bitter, as he was led down the aisle of his own courtroom. "There will be more like me. You can't stop them all." Keanu didn't move. He didn't need to say anything more. Instead, he watched silently as the judge was taken away. His words were clear, and they had struck deep into the heart of the judge's authority. "Maybe not," Keanu said quietly, but to himself. "But we stopped you." The news spread faster than anyone could imagine. By sunset, clips of Judge Hawk being escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs flooded television screens, news feeds, and social media across the country. The once untouchable man was brought low, and people saw the symbol of powerful justice finally served. But what followed next was even more important. The truth had been unlocked, and one by one, people began to speak out. Emily Harper, who had faced workplace discrimination, held a press conference outside a small community center in Ohio. She spoke openly for the first time in 2 years. "He told me I had no proof," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "He said I was imagining the bias. But I wasn't. And now we all know why he didn't want the evidence to be heard." Then came Mrs. Anderson's daughter, who had begged the court to allow her elderly mother to explain where her life savings came from before they were stripped away by a corporate lawsuit. Judge Hawk had refused to hear her testimony. "Yes," the woman said quietly outside the courthouse, tears in her eyes. "My mother died thinking the system had failed her. But now I think she's finally been heard." Across the country, from small towns to big cities, people whose cases had been ignored, buried, and silenced began to share their stories. They didn't have to shout anymore. The truth had been brought into the light, and it was no longer hidden. Keanu stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't do interviews or press conferences. Instead, he worked quietly behind the scenes, helping people who had been wronged by the system. He connected victims with legal aid and helped organize retrials for those who had been unfairly judged. Keanu was a man of action, not words. One afternoon, Keanu visited a small church in Indiana. The church had tried to testify on behalf of a man named Mr. Thompson, a small business owner who had been financially destroyed by Judge Hawk's decisions. The congregation welcomed him with quiet nods and open hands. No cameras, no audience. Just him, the cross around his neck, and the quiet glow of a flickering candle. An older man, his boots worn out from years of work in a print shop, approached Keanu slowly. "I thought men like him couldn't be touched," the man said softly, his voice full of disbelief. Keanu turned to him, meeting his eyes with a calm smile. "They can," he said. "But only if someone is willing to speak up and someone is willing to listen." The man nodded, taking in the words. "Thank you," he said. Keanu shook his head gently. "Don't thank me," he replied. "Thank the truth. It's been waiting a long time to be heard." A year had passed. The courtroom where it all happened now stood quiet, the sunlight filtering through high, dust-covered windows. The judge's gavel, which had once slammed down with fury, was now locked away as evidence. A new judge sat at the bench, fair, careful, and cautious with every word. But Keanu wasn't there to see it. Instead, he stood on the back lawn of a modest community center in Milwaukee, watching children laughing as they spilled out of an art room. Their mothers sat in folding chairs nearby, sipping coffee, chatting, and organizing. Some of them had once faced eviction, discrimination, and silence. Now they were helping others, lifting up the voices of those who had been ignored. Keanu stood alone beneath a maple tree watching them. He wore the same white shirt, the same gray jacket, and the cross around his neck, steady and simple. Derek, the man whose case had started everything, walked up to him. He was no longer bent under the weight of fear and stress. He looked lighter, more relaxed, and rested. "You didn't have to do what you did," Derek said softly. "You didn't have to testify. You had nothing to gain from this." Keanu smiled slightly, his gaze still on the children playing. "Maybe not," he replied. But sometimes doing the right thing isn't about what you have to do. It's about what you can't ignore. Derek folded his arms and nodded. You never took that cross off, did you? Not even when Hawk demanded it. Keanu glanced down at the cross, his fingers curling around the pendant. I thought it was a symbol of weakness, he said quietly. But it wasn't. Derek looked at him, waiting for more. What was it then? Keanu smiled faintly. It was a reminder, he said, his voice soft. That truth doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need a title, a robe, or a microphone. It just waits patiently until someone is willing to carry it into the light. Derek nodded thoughtfully. Keanu turned his eyes to the children playing. The wind shifted, and the cross swayed gently over his heart. It caught a glint of golden light. It didn't scream or shine brightly. It just hung there, steady and simple like it always had. It wasn't a symbol of perfection. It was a symbol of persistence. A quiet voice reminding everyone that even when the world breaks and the powerful abuse their thrones, justice is still possible. And there are always those brave enough to carry it. If you like this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures, mysteries, and unforgettable moments. Your support keeps these stories alive and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.